Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Tony and Sarah Unscripted. Today, I have to tell you that we have a guest that is really, really close to my heart. He's an amazing attorney. He's an advocate for the trans community, and he's also my best friend, Dru Levasseur. Finally,
Yay.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So for our listeners who don't know you at all, believe it or not, there are some people. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. I am an openly trans attorney, as you said. I transitioned 20 years ago. I also graduated law school 20 years ago. And I turned 50 this past year, so it's been like a milestone kind of moment. And yeah, I grew up in Connecticut. I did most of my litigation career in New York City, and in the last, I guess, 7 years, I've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and doing a lot of peer mentorship stuff that I'm happy to talk about. But most of all, I'm just excited to be here because I'm just so excited that you have a podcast with Sarah. I love how you guys are keeping it real. I have so many things I want to talk about today with you both, but I think the biggest thing that I'm excited to talk about is our friendship.
Yeah. It's been a long, long time. And I'll tell you, with community connection and all that, but we met because of the Jim Collins Foundation.
Yes.
So
and I wore the t-shirt.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess our origin story was I think I just graduated or was clerking, and I spoke at Yale Law School. You were there. And when we connected after that, and we both talked about how we had both had this dream of like starting a foundation to fund surgeries for our community. This was like 2007. And so, I mean, you describe it as our friendship kind of grew from doing that work together.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Because when we started out, I didn't say, oh my God. And, you're a cool guy. I mean, I was like, wow, when I was listening to him speak, I sat back, I was like, holy shit, this guy has the same energy I have and the same passion and compassion for our community. So I knew I wanted to connect with him, but I wanted to start a foundation. So when I reached out, got his card, reached out to him, he had the same exact vision. So that, we knew we had to do something together, but never, and I don't know about you, in a million years did I ever think that I would develop the best friendship I've ever had in my whole life.
Aww.
Honestly. It's the truth.
Yeah.
We've gotten each other through some hard times, especially now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, one of the things that I didn't know about, like as an activist or, coming up in the community is the importance of finding your people, and that community is not an option. Like, I think it was like, oh yeah, I could dip in and out of these support groups or do this activism, and it's always there. But I think the learning experience for me was that, I need my people. I needed Tony. And it was like our evolution of our friendship was like, let's do a thing together. And it was then about leaning on each other. And that was, I think, the reason that foundation was successful.
Yeah, I remember the first year we were accepting applications, and that was through snail mail. Okay.
Back in the day.
And we figured we'd get one or two, 225 applications came in. And we only had enough money to help one person, and I was so stressed out about that.
Right?
How are we going to say no to all? Remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, you really supported me through that, because when it's so funny, because when I'm stressing out, you come in so calm, and when he's stressing out, it's
a balancing act.
Balancing act.
But even before that, though, like backing up, I think when we had this idea, and we were like, we had just both kind of transitioned around the same time, 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And we had to look around and like lean on our elders. We're like, whose shoulders are we standing on? Jerry Marie Leesgang in Connecticut was a mentor to both of us. And, I think about her often. We just lost her in the last couple of years. But I think, we asked, has anybody done this before? Because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And people had tried and really, because this was a great need. I mean, this was before people were talking about trans people, where they didn't even know what that was. And we were talking about a subset within our community of people who desperately needed surgeries, not just hormones, but like surgeries. So that was a minority within a minority. And because we had both had access to getting that covered for when you had like a car accident settlement.
And I had the settlement. Yeah, that's how I got my top surgery.
And I had, an uncle who, helped me out, and then we looked around and we're like, what about everyone else who doesn't have the access to that? So we had this such personal understanding of the need. And we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And I really do think that our success was because it was two of us, and it was because of our friendship. We made an agreement at the beginning that what did we say? It was like, we're not going to get stressed out about this.
And even the board, like when we put a board together, we're like, nobody gets stressed out. But when you're reading the applications and we have people tell us their stories, and every word was triggering sometimes, some nights, and we had to say, okay, don't read more than 3 applications a night. I mean, we really had to take care of ourselves because, people were holding on by a thread.
Yeah.
And you knew what that felt like.
Yeah.
So, and then having like the board that we created was like, Liz, right? We had like one person, then we had a couple, but it was those often like cis allies who were also holding us together and helping us stay organized and all that. So it was such an amazing way to like develop a friendship. And I think we did 10 years of board service and out there telling our personal stories of something deeply personal and and being visible. And when we stepped away from it, I actually had a lot of anxiety of like, will Tony and I still be friends? Because like all we knew was how to like have a project together, And so there was like another kind of iteration of our friendship.
What are we going to talk about now?
Yeah, are we going to just be like sitting in silence?
Never.
And like we need something to do. And so like I think a lot of our both of our healing journeys as activists has been, like I remember when I was the director of the Trans Rights Project at Lambda Legal, which is like oldest, largest, I was the token trans attorney back in like 2009 to 2019, and I would be the first one in, last one to leave, kind of like, I gotta help my community, that kind of martyrdom, desperate trauma response, And I think to sustain this work over decades like this, it was kind of a wake-up call, and I feel like we've helped each other on this. It's a wake-up call to be like, wait a second, we can't be operating at this kind of crisis level all the time. Oh my God, or what if? And we had to be like, what can we do, and what have people done before, and what will people do after us?
Yeah.
And I think that relates to a lot of you focusing on the youth before anybody was.
Yeah. Yeah, it was dear to my heart. I mean, I was a trans youth, like a lot of trans adults, because we transitioned later in life. We have to remember. So for some of us, I know I was a trans kid.
Yeah.
So to be able to help them have a smoother journey, or help the parents, not accept, but just embrace their child for who they are, was really important. I'm not doing the work that much anymore, and I miss it.
Yeah.
But again, 21 years of work, maybe it's, time to step back a little bit.
I mean, I'll also say, though, I think you say you're not doing the work. It just looks different. I think everybody, like, you are still continuing to help so many people. You can't even help it. Your existence, it has shifted. I mean, we can't walk down a street like anywhere in New Haven or close by and not run into somebody a parent or a kid who's now in their 30s or something, who comes up to Tony and says, like, you saved my child's life, you changed my life. Oh my God, you are a mentor and an inspiration to so many people, and they're walking around today thinking about you in their heads, and you're like, well, I don't do the work anymore. Yes, you do. It's just like, I'm excited to see, what, and again, another iteration of like, what does that work look like? We started off being like, gotta help everybody, and then we got to help, talk to the world and help other people help, and now it's about more healing journey, right?
Yeah, and the Jim Collins Foundation, I believe, was the first trans-led a nonprofit organization that did this work, and I think that's important. I want to touch base a little bit, if you don't mind, on the trans-led part of it. I think that's getting lost in the world, and I don't know if it's because of the way this country is viewing trans people or not. But can you touch base on what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like, with the Jim Collins Foundation back in 2007, when we were still trying to figure out the name, we named it after Tony's therapist, who was a cis ally. And I never met him, but I
passed away suddenly.
Somebody who helped Tony that much. It was that kind of thing, So, we named it after someone who's not transgender, but it was really important that we as trans people who've had that personal experience, that we knew that how people were feeling when they were applying, it was really important that we were the ones leading the work. And I think that I saw, looked around and looked at all the organizations that I was, wanting to work at, my dream jobs. And, there were very few trans-led organizations that had any money. That were, we actually did our own funding, and we, looked into getting some grants. And at that time, it was like, forget about it. There was no way any funder was going to fund trans issues, never mind surgeries.
Yeah.
So we didn't even go down that path. We went to New York City, took classes on grant making and all that, and then we realized there's a brick wall. So we started doing it, just with individual donors and so on, and from hearts and minds. So that trans-led piece was really authentic.
Yeah.
So when I looked around at the organizations that I worked at as the trans, director of the trans project or whatever it was all cisgender led. And how it felt to be in those organizations doing the trans work was like sometimes screaming into a void of being like, excuse me, what about this? And then, having to prove my value, having to prove that I belong there, never feeling like I belonged, never feeling like my voice mattered, having other people speak for us. It was just, so for me, that volunteer work I was doing on the side with a full-time national litigator job was life-giving to me, because it was teaching me that I do have a voice. I do know what I'm talking about. We got us. And so I think that was part of the values that I developed, in the last 20 years, was seeing the power in for us, by us. And so, most recently I was I served as a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion for another LGBT, cis-led organization. And, I think the evolution for me was like, I need to be working for trans-led and working with trans-led, particularly now where there's so much anti-trans animus, where, the experts are saying we're midway through a genocide here in the United States. And the power of trusting trans people right now and listening to us and our voices as leaders, I think is so critical and so lost right now. So most recently, I just did a post on like social media about I've never worked for a better boss. Like I just started my own last couple of years. Yeah, exactly.
Subtle brag.
It's like the most trans supportive workplace.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Speaking of wellness in the workplace and things like that, like, but having my own consultancy, Dru Levasseur Consulting, it's like life-changing for me, because I do get to trust my own voice. I don't have to, prove my value. I don't have to scream into a void and then doubt myself and internalize all the workplace traumas, whatever. So, so that's been really powerful. And I have chosen to partner with trans-led organizations. Like, I run this trans legal professionals networking program that's global, and it's open to anybody who identifies as trans and non-binary who works in the legal field. So we're talking not just lawyers, but also like business professionals and judges and law students. And so we have the full range of, 125 plus folks in there, and everybody gets to be at the table together in these meetings that I facilitate, and it's peer-to-peer kind of mentorship. And I'm partnering with the National Trans Bar, which hosts that. So it's a for us, by us, and we're creating, I'm creating these community spaces where there's intergenerational different, all the hierarchy we have at like law firms, for example, where business professional never gets to talk to the partner. Everybody is in the room together, and we're supporting each other because we have the same struggles in common. And the power of that, there's a call right now with genocide and all this stuff that's happening right now. There's a call for cis allies to help us. Like when I speak at, I'm like, please, we need you now more than ever. But at the same time, we have everything we need, and we got us. So there's that kind of duality of like, we don't need you to save us, we need you alongside us and to listen to us.
Yeah, like don't stand in front of us. That's the whole thing. It's like there's a lot of trans people who are definitely in the position to lead, but they're not given the opportunity to, and it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because maybe they think they're doing a good thing, and they, from their heart they are, but it's not good for our community.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
I do. I mean, it reminds me of, as you were talking, I was thinking of like women in the work field, right? I mean, it's the same type of thing that they're experiencing. And when you look at it that way, what they experience, and then to see that trans men are experiencing that exact same thing where their voice doesn't matter, or they live it. So you should be the ones that are leading it because you know exactly how it is and you know how it feels.
Yeah.
Trans men and trans women, sorry. But also for me, as you know, when I started doing the stuff that I was doing, it was like insulting to me. And I remember you telling me many times to be like, you're a cis woman, you have no idea. And I remember being given a hard time by some people in the LGBTQ community. And it was confusing because when we started Guildford Pride, the first year that we did it, you were the only person on it besides Cameron on the committee that was transgender or even gay.
Yeah.
You're not gay.
LGBTQ.
But LGBTQ. Yeah. But it was like, well, what are we supposed to do then? Are we not supposed to help out? I saw a need. We saw a need in our own town. But it was more making sure that we listened to the community. So I do think a lot of the LGBTQ community, and I see it more now in Cameron, don't want to be in the spotlight.
Yeah.
They just don't want to do
it.
Can't.
Yeah.
And they just don't want to. So it's trying to find, because we did have two lesbians that came on the committee and then lasted a year, and that was it. And I don't really know why. But we just felt that, are we not supposed to do what we're doing simply because we're not part of the community? When a few of us had transgender children, and that's why we had started it, that's why we were doing it. But then it was just to remember, like you had reminded me, just listen to the community. And even Cameron would say, no one's listening to what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And he was, a few years younger than he is now. So he was, but still he was like, but I think this, or I think that. And I'm the only one that's representing as an LGBTQ community, part of the LGBTQ community. So it's kind of a tricky business of trying to figure it out. Yeah. And I got over being sensitive about it. And I just thought, well, we're not exclusive to, you have to be part of the cis community. We would love anybody help. And now our Alex board we've got transgender, we've got gay, we've got non-binary, we've got cis parents of trans. So we've covered it.
Very diverse.
We've covered it very much. But it's hard to, people would say to me, you should have people of color. Well, how do I find people of color? Like it's harder when you're not in the community to find those people that you should have on the board or on the committee. But even to find someone of gay representation, I was like, oh, should I just say to someone, are you gay? Before, you know what I mean? Like it's a really hard,
a gay person.
It's a really hard situation. But what I see the two of you talking about now is it's almost like there are trans people that want to be involved and they're not being allowed to be involved.
Well, I think it's like, we're going to pave the path for you as a trans, but there's going to be a gate because you can't go past this spot because then you're going to be too much in a leadership role. So you just stay back there. And, listen, I've been doing this a long time. I know you've been doing this a long time. And I want to see younger people at the table. I want to see the younger people at the table. It's just like when I first started doing work with trans kids, there was adults in the room telling each other what they needed. And I was like, no, ask them.
Yeah.
So why don't we ask the trans community, what do you need? Who do you want to see lead the movement and see what happens?
It's hard now, though, because they are very nervous.
Yeah. I
right?
mean, the young tension around putting people in the spotlight, I feel like you really highlight that. I mean, and also what you're talking about, like, I feel like is something that we all struggle with because we're all allies to somebody.
Right.
And we're all in this position of trying to, like, do the right thing. And like, oh, like the option that you would have of like, well, I don't want to, take over and take up space, so I better just not do anything at all, is not an option that you had, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you're like, I have to do something. I'm going to do it imperfectly. That's what we're all doing. Like, we're going to lean into it. We're going to have to clean stuff up, but we have to do something. And the more we can have, people who are like, I always like to quote like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. She says, those closest to the pain need to be closest to the power. Like, that's one of the values of like, and nothing about us without us. Those kinds of statements in my head are always like, that's how I try to do the work of, an allyship, even within our own community as, two white trans guys. We often were in a position of being allies, even with the Jim Collins Foundation work, because we were trying to center the people who are most marginalized in our community and trying to make sure that we had an inclusive board, that we were really like, with the structure of how we were doing the selection, we ended up having an anonymous selection committee of mostly like trans women of color, like who could we censor to make the decisions?
Yeah.
So it was all a design question of like, how do we design this work so that we're actually getting the correct voices and not having like the one person on the board, speak for the whole community. Like, we couldn't speak.
Yeah. And it was
we could
all
speak
like,
for ourselves. That's it.
And it was based on financial need. Like, you like, I remember when we first started, I got a phone call from this trans woman. She was like, well, I really don't want to put a second mortgage on my home. And I was like, well, no, listen, this is for like people who have nothing.
Yeah.
They would never be able to access that, right? I think that we even funded a trans guy's top surgery that was in a homeless shelter. Yeah. And then he was so confident afterwards, he became a barber, and now he's really, really successful. But there was a misconception from the start, because it was led by two trans guys, that we only funded top surgeries.
Yeah.
When most of the majority of the surgeries were trans for trans females.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think the allyship piece is something that I feel like we all need to lean into, and it kind of relates to like one of the themes about where do we find folks. A lot of that trans-led work that I'm trying to do, like the mission is to create a pipeline. Like, we need to have a pipeline of people, particularly like trans people of color, who we can say, oh, we're investing in folks, and now we know when we have positions, we know who we can turn to, or the younger people who, like you said, have the voices and know what they need.
Yeah.
And they are the experts. So that, so the trans legal professionals group, like, that is a pipeline, because I have like incoming law students having access to trans judges. And, literally looking at like the legal pipeline of like, and having a group. I have sponsors of this group of like law firms, and now even a trans-led company in Portugal. One of the former partners at a law firm is a trans woman of color, moved to Portugal, because some people who have money right now are moving out of the country, as we know. And she, sponsors the group. So it's like trans-led companies sponsoring trans-led work.
That's very cool. Yeah.
So, but the people want to know who's supporting this work when they're thinking about, where should I go work? Where is it safe? Who's going to support me? So I'm trying to connect those things too. But creating a pipeline, I feel like, is something that, like going back to what you said of like you doing the work, you have created a pipeline with the work you've done over the last 20 plus years of, this network of people who have now believing in themselves are now, what are they, like doctors? And I mean, that if you look
it just amazes. It amazes me, because you don't realize when my art show on Sunday, their parent came in and she was like, oh yeah, my kid is 26. I was like, 26? What are you talking about? What happened? Yeah. And I mean, like, some of them are now 30, they were 14.
Yeah.
They got older, but you didn't.
I did not.
No.
Yeah.
I don't age.
You don't.
I don't even age mentally. Like, I am proud of my immaturity. That's just the way I am. Well, so I'm glad you got used to it.
Oh yeah.
He got used to it. He's just as mature as I am. I can tell stories, but I don't. So our conversation with Dru has been so great that we're going to continue it with the second part. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening, everyone.